It was a quiet evening at the mansion, and the sound of rain tapping against the windows filled the air. Jonathan sat in his study, staring at the pile of papers on his desk. He had just finished reviewing some business reports, but his mind wasn't fully focused on work. Instead, it kept wandering back to Maria, the maid who had been working for him for 3 years. Maria wasn't like the other staff members. She didn't gossip or linger around when her tasks were done. Every morning, she arrived early, dressed neatly in her uniform, with a calm expression that made her seem almost distant. But what really caught Jonathan's attention was how hard she worked. It wasn't just about cleaning floors or dusting furniture. There was something deeper about the way she carried herself. There was a quiet determination in her movements, as if she were carrying more than just a broom or a mop. That day, however, something unusual happened. Maria left work earlier than usual. Normally, she stayed until late afternoon, making sure everything in the house was spotless before heading out. But today, she grabbed her bag, said a quick goodbye, and walked out the door without even looking back. This sudden departure piqued Jonathan's curiosity. Where was she going? Why did she leave so early? He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether he should follow her. After all, Maria was an employee, not someone whose personal life concerned him. But then again, there was something about her that always left him wondering. So, grabbing his coat from the rack near the door, he decided to see where she went. He told himself it was harmless. He wasn't spying, just satisfying a small itch of curiosity. The rain outside had slowed down to a drizzle, leaving the streets damp and glistening under the fading light of the evening sun. Maria walked briskly, her steps steady and purposeful. She didn't look over her shoulder or stop to chat with anyone along the way. Jonathan kept his distance, careful not to draw attention to himself. He followed her through the tree-lined roads of the wealthy neighborhood, past the manicured lawns and towering gates of other mansions. As they moved further away from the upscale area, the scenery began to change. The wide streets narrowed, and the grand houses gave way to smaller buildings. Maria turned onto a busy road lined with shops and cafes. People hurried past, clutching umbrellas or shopping bags, completely unaware of the man trailing behind them. Jonathan felt a strange mix of excitement and guilt. What exactly was he doing? Was this invasion of privacy justified by mere curiosity? Yet, he couldn't bring himself to turn back. Eventually, Maria stopped at a bus stop. She glanced at her watch, then pulled out her phone to check something. A few minutes later, a bus pulled up, its tires hissing against the wet pavement. Without hesitation, she climbed aboard. Jonathan hesitated for a second, debating whether to get on the same bus. Finally, he stepped forward and paid his fare, taking a seat several rows behind her. The ride was long and bumpy, and the bus grew quieter as they traveled deeper into parts of the city Jonathan rarely visited. The polished glass towers and luxury cars disappeared, replaced by faded brick buildings and graffiti-covered walls. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting uneven shadows on the cracked sidewalks below. Jonathan noticed Maria gripping her bag tightly, as though holding on to something precious inside. When the bus finally came to a halt, Maria stood up and exited quickly. Jonathan waited a moment before following her off. They were now in a part of town that looked nothing like the world he knew. The streets here were narrow and crowded, with vendors selling cheap snacks and children playing soccer in empty lots. Clotheslines hung between windows, swaying gently in the breeze. It was a far cry from the pristine orderliness of his mansion. Maria walked confidently through the maze-like streets, weaving past groups of people chatting loudly and dodging puddles left behind by the earlier rain. Eventually, she stopped in front of a dilapidated apartment building. Its paint was peeling, and the entrance was flanked by overflowing trash bins. Jonathan watched as she pushed open the heavy metal door and disappeared inside, standing there. In the cold night air, Jonathan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. What was waiting for her inside? And why had she brought him here, unknowingly leading him into a world so different from his own? His heart raced as he realized he had two choices: walk away and forget what he'd seen, or take a step closer to uncover the truth. Steeling himself, he quietly entered the building, determined to find out more. The inside of the apartment building was dimly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights casting long shadows on the cracked walls. The air smelled faintly of dampness and old wood. Jonathan hesitated for a moment at the entrance, his ears picking up the distant hum of voices and the occasional creak of footsteps above him. He knew he shouldn't be here. This wasn't his world, but his curiosity had taken hold of him, pulling him forward like an invisible thread. Maria had already disappeared up the stairs, her figure swallowed by the gloom. Jonathan moved cautiously, careful not to make too much noise. Each step he took echoed softly in the narrow stairwell, and he winced every time the floorboards groaned beneath his weight. As he climbed higher, the sounds around him grew louder: laughter from one apartment, the blaring of a television from another, and somewhere above, the unmistakable chatter of children. When he reached the fourth floor, he saw Maria standing outside a door marked 4B. She fumbled with her keys for a moment before unlocking it and stepping inside. Jonathan stayed hidden in the shadows, peering around the corner just enough to see into the room. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. Apartment was small, cramped, and cluttered with second-hand furniture that looked like it had seen better days. A faded couch sat against one wall, its cushions patched with duct tape. A tiny kitchenette occupied one corner, with mismatched plates stacked neatly on a shelf. But none of that held Jonathan's attention for long. What truly caught his eye and tugged at his heart was the sight of three young children rushing toward Maria, their faces lighting up with pure joy. "Mama!" They cried out in unison, wrapping their arms around her legs as though afraid she might disappear if they let go. Two boys no older than 7 or 8 clung to her while a little girl, perhaps 4 or 5, held up a drawing she'd made. Her voice was high-pitched and excited as she showed it off, pointing to scribbles of stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Maria knelt down, hugging them tightly, her face softening in a way Jonathan had never seen before. Gone was the quiet, reserved woman who cleaned his house with precision and care. In her place was someone entirely different, a mother, brimming with love and patience. She kissed each child on the forehead, asking about their day in a tone so warm it made Jonathan feel like an intruder. He watched silently as Maria set down her bag and began unpacking a few items: a loaf of bread, some canned goods, and a small container of milk. Whatever she'd bought wasn't much, but she handled it all with care, arranging things on the counter as though preparing a feast. The kids didn't seem to mind the simplicity of the meal. Instead, they chattered happily, helping her pull out plates and spoons. Their laughter filled the room, bouncing off the thin walls and creating an atmosphere so full of life that it felt almost magical. But then, something else caught Jonathan's eye: a stack of papers sitting on the rickety dining table. Even from where he stood, he could see the bold red letters stamped across the top: past due, medical bills, rent notices, utility warnings. Each document told a story of struggle, of barely making ends meet. And next to the pile lay a letter from a local hospital, its envelope torn open. Jonathan couldn't read the details from his vantage point, but he didn't need to. He could guess what it said. His chest tightened as he thought about how much effort Maria must put into keeping everything together, not just for herself, but for these 3 little lives depending on her. She worked tirelessly at his mansion, always arriving early and leaving late, yet somehow managed to keep this fragile world spinning without complaint. How had he missed this? How had he failed to notice the weight she carried? As Maria continued cooking, humming softly to herself, Jonathan felt a wave of shame wash over him. Here he was, living in luxury, surrounded by comforts most people only dreamed of, while she fought every day to provide even the basics for her family. And despite all that, she still showed up to work with a smile, never once asking for sympathy or help. For a moment, he considered stepping into the apartment, introducing himself, and offering assistance. But something held him back. Maybe it was fear of embarrassing her, or maybe it was the realization that this wasn't the right time or place. Instead, he slipped away quietly, retracing his steps down the creaky staircase and out into the cool night air. The walk back to his car felt longer than it should have. Every step weighed heavily on him, as if the truth he'd uncovered had settled deep into his bones. Who was this woman, really? How had she managed to keep her struggles hidden for so long? And why hadn't she ever said anything? By the time Jonathan reached home, the mansion felt colder than usual. The grand chandeliers and polished marble floors, which normally symbolized success and stability, now seemed hollow compared to the warmth and resilience he'd witnessed in that tiny apartment. Sitting alone in his study, he stared at the empty fireplace, replaying the scene in his mind over and over again. He realized something important that night. Wealth wasn't just about money. It was about connection, compassion, and understanding. Maria might not have had much in terms of material possessions, but she had something far more valuable, a family that loved her, and a strength that inspired awe. Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that he owed her something, not out of pity, but out of respect for the person she truly was. And so, as the clock ticked past midnight, Jonathan made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't forget what he'd seen tonight. Somehow, he would find a way to help Maria, not because she asked for it, but because it was the right thing to do. The next morning, Jonathan woke up with a heaviness in his chest. The image of Maria and her children lingered in his mind, refusing to fade no matter how hard he tried to focus on anything else. He sat at the breakfast table, staring at his untouched coffee, replaying every detail of what he'd seen the previous night. The laughter of the kids, the worn-out furniture, the stack of overdue bills, it all felt so vivid, as if he were still standing there in that cramped apartment. He couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at him. How had he been so blind? For 3 years, Maria had worked in his home, quietly going about her duties without ever hinting at the struggle she faced outside those polished walls. She never complained, never asked for extra time off, never even mentioned having children. And here he was, living in luxury, completely oblivious to the reality of her life. As the day went on, Jonathan found himself distracted. He canceled a meeting with his financial advisor, something he rarely did, because his thoughts kept drifting back to Maria. What could he do to help? Simply giving her money outright didn't feel right. It might embarrass her or make her feel like charity. He needed a way to ease her burden without crossing any boundaries. But how? By late afternoon, an idea began to form in his mind. It started small, almost hesitant, but grew stronger as he thought it through. He decided to act anonymously at first, keeping his involvement hidden until he figured out the best way to approach her directly. That evening, after everyone else had left the house, he sat down at his desk and made a few phone calls. First, he contacted the hospital mentioned in the letter he'd glimpsed on Maria's table. Posing as a representative from a charitable organization, he inquired about her outstanding medical bills. To his relief, the staff were cooperative once he assured them the payment would come from a legitimate source. Within hours, the bills were settled, and a confirmation email landed in his inbox. Next, he reached out to the landlord of Maria's building. Again, posing as someone working behind the scenes, he arranged to pay 6 months' worth of rent up front. When the landlord hesitated, surprised by the unexpected generosity, Jonathan simply explained that it was part of a program to support struggling families. The man didn't ask too many questions. Money had a way of smoothing over doubts. Those immediate concerns taken care of, Jonathan leaned back in his chair, feeling a mix of relief and unease. On one hand, he knew he'd done something good. On the other, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this wasn't enough. Paying off debts and covering rent was helpful, sure, but it didn't address the bigger picture. Maria deserved more than just temporary fixes. She deserved stability, dignity, and a chance to breathe. Over the next few days, Jonathan made a conscious effort to change the way he interacted with Maria. Instead of treating her like just another employee, he started engaging her in conversation. At first, it was awkward. He wasn't used to talking to people below his social circle beyond polite pleasantries, but slowly he found his rhythm. He asked about her weekend plans, complimented her cooking when she prepared meals, and even joked about the weather. Maria seemed surprised at first, unsure how to respond to this sudden shift in behavior. But as the days passed, she began to open up, sharing small details about her life. She talked about her kids, their favorite games, their school projects, and how proud she was of their progress despite the challenges they faced. She spoke fondly of volunteering at a local community center on Saturdays, helping other parents navigate similar struggles. Her eyes lit up whenever she mentioned these things, and Jonathan realized how much passion she poured into everything she did. One afternoon, while Maria was dusting the shelves in the living room, Jonathan mustered the courage to broach a more personal topic. "You know," he said casually, "you've been working here for quite some time now. I can't imagine managing everything you do without breaking a sweat." Maria paused mid-stroke, looking at him with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "It's not always easy," she admitted after a moment, her voice soft but steady. "But I do what I have to. My kids, they're my priority. As long as they're happy and healthy, I can handle anything." Her words struck a chord deep within Jonathan. Here was a woman who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, yet spoke about it with such quiet strength. He wanted to tell her then and there about the payments he'd made, to assure her that she wouldn't have to worry about rent or medical bills for a while. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the fear of ruining the fragile trust they were building, or maybe it was the realization that true kindness often works best when it remains unseen. Instead, he smiled warmly and said, "Well, I just want you to know that if there's ever anything you need, if you ever feel overwhelmed, you can come to me." No strings attached. Maria blinked, clearly caught off guard. For a moment, she looked like she might argue or brush off her, but then she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "That means a lot." From that day forward, their relationship began to transform. Jonathan no longer saw Maria as just a maid. She became someone he genuinely admired and respected. In turn, Maria seemed to relax around him, her guarded demeanor softening, as she realized he wasn't just another distant employer. They shared stories, laughed over silly misunderstandings, and even debated the merits of different TV shows during breaks. A few weeks later, Maria approached him nervously, holding an envelope in her hands. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Someone paid off my bills and my rent. I don't know who it was, but I think it might have been you." Jonathan hesitated, torn between admitting the truth and letting her believe it was someone else. Finally, he settled for a middle ground. "Let's just say I have connections," he said with a gentle smile. "And let's also agree that you've earned every bit of help you receive. You work harder than anyone I know, and you deserve some peace of mind." Maria stared at him for a long moment, then nodded silently, clutching the envelope to her chest. There were no grand speeches or dramatic moments, just a quiet understanding passing between them. In that instant, Jonathan knew he'd made the right decision. Helping Maria wasn't about fixing her problems overnight. It was about showing her that she wasn't alone, that someone cared enough to lighten her load, even if only a little dot as the weeks turned into months. Jonathan noticed subtle changes in Maria. She seemed less tense, more confident in her interactions with others. She started taking on additional responsibilities around the house, not because she was told to, but because she wanted to contribute more. And though she still worked hard, there was a new lightness in her step, a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. For Jonathan, the transformation was equally profound. Watching Maria rise above her circumstances inspired him to rethink his own priorities. Wealth, he realized, wasn't measured by bank accounts or luxury cars. It was about the impact you had on the lives of others. By opening his eyes to Maria's struggles, he discovered a deeper purpose for himself, one rooted in empathy and connection. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. Over the following weeks, Jonathan found himself looking forward to seeing Maria more than he cared to admit. It wasn't just her presence that intrigued him, it was the way she carried herself now, with a renewed sense of confidence and purpose. The weight on her shoulders seemed lighter, though she still worked as hard as ever. She laughed more often, shared stories about her kids without hesitation, and even offered suggestions for improving household routines. It was as if she'd been given permission to step into a version of herself she'd kept hidden for years. But Jonathan knew this change wasn't solely because of what he'd done behind the scenes. Yes, paying off her bills and covering her rent had provided temporary relief, but it was something deeper, a shift in their dynamic, that truly made the difference. By treating Maria as an equal, by showing genuine interest in her life, he'd unknowingly given her something far more valuable, respect. And that, he realized, could be life-changing. One Saturday morning, Maria mentioned she was heading to the community center where she volunteered. Jonathan, curious about this side of her life, decided to tag along. He told himself it was purely out of curiosity, after all. He wanted to understand the world she lived in, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. He admired her resilience and wanted to see firsthand how she spent her free time when she wasn't working for him. The community center was located in the same neighborhood as Maria's apartment, housed in a modest building that looked like it had seen better days. Its walls were painted a cheerful yellow, but cracks ran through the paint, and the sign above the door hung slightly crooked. Inside, however, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Children played games in one corner, while adults gathered around tables discussing everything from job opportunities to parenting tips. Volunteers bustled about, setting up chairs, handing out snacks, and organizing activities. Maria wasted no time getting to work. She greeted everyone warmly, calling people by name and asking about their families. To Jonathan's surprise, she seemed to know almost everyone there. She helped a young mother fill out a form for childcare assistance, chatted with a teenager about his school project, and even joined a group of kids playing a board game. Watching her interact with such ease and warmth, Jonathan couldn't help but smile. This was a side of Maria he'd never imagined existed, the vibrant, compassionate heart of a woman who gave so much of herself to others. As the afternoon wore on, Jonathan wandered around the center, observing the various programs it offered. There was a literacy class for adults, a homework club for kids, and even a small food pantry stocked with donated goods. He struck up conversations with a few volunteers, learning about the challenges faced by the community and the efforts being made to address them. Many spoke passionately about their work, sharing stories of triumphs and setbacks alike. At one point, a middle-aged woman approached him, mistaking him for a potential donor. "We're always looking for support," she said earnestly, handing him a flyer. Every little bit helps. Jonathan nodded politely, tucking the flyer into his pocket. But instead of brushing her off, he found himself asking questions about the center's funding, its goals, and how it managed to keep running despite limited resources. The woman, thrilled to have someone listening, eagerly explained that most of their funding came from local donations and occasional grants. It's not easy, she admitted, but we do what we can. People here need hope, and this place gives them that. By the time Jonathan left the community center later that evening, his mind was racing with ideas. What if he could do more? What if he used his resources to make a bigger impact, not just for Maria, but for others like her? The thought excited him in a way he hadn't felt in years. For so long, his wealth had felt like a burden, a responsibility he didn't fully understand how to manage. But now, standing outside that humble building, he saw a path forward, one that combined his means with his newfound desire to create meaningful change. The next day, Jonathan called his financial advisor and began drafting plans for a foundation. He envisioned it as a resource for single parents struggling to balance work, family, and finances. It would offer scholarships for children, job training programs for adults, and emergency assistance for those facing unexpected hardships. He named it simply, A New Chapter. The name reflected not only the mission of the foundation but also the personal transformation he'd undergone since meeting Maria. When he finally broke the news to Maria, she was speechless. He invited her to his study one evening after work, explaining his plans and asking for her input. "You've shown me what true strength looks like," he said sincerely, "and I want to honor that by helping others in similar situations. But I need your help. I don't know the first thing about running a program like this." Maria blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the gesture. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "This is more than I ever dreamed possible." "Well, start dreaming bigger," Jonathan replied with a grin, "because this is just the beginning." Together they began shaping the foundation, drawing on Maria's experiences and connections within the community. She introduced him to other volunteers, many of whom agreed to serve on the board or contribute their expertise. They held brainstorming sessions late into the night, fueled by cups of coffee and a shared vision of creating something lasting, and IMPACTFUL. In addition to launching the foundation, Jonathan made another significant decision. He promoted Maria to a managerial role within his household staff. Her new position came with flexible hours, allowing her to spend more time with her children and continue volunteering at the community center. He also increased her salary, ensuring she had the financial stability she deserved. When he presented the offer, Maria hesitated, clearly torn between gratitude and pride. "I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage," she started, but Jonathan cut her off gently. "This isn't charity," he said firmly. "It's recognition of your value. You've earned every bit of it and then some." With each passing week, Jonathan noticed subtle changes in his own life as well. He spent less time holed up in his study reviewing spreadsheets and more time engaging with the people around him. He attended events at the community center, mingling with families and learning about their dreams and struggles. He even started teaching a basic finance workshop for adults, sharing tips on budgeting and saving. The joy he felt in giving back was unlike anything he'd experienced before. Maria, too, blossomed in ways that amazed both of them. With the added flexibility and security, she threw herself into her new roles with boundless enthusiasm. She became a mentor to younger parents at the community center, offering advice and encouragement based on her own journey. Her children thrived under the stability she provided, excelling in school and growing more confident with each passing month. Despite their growing closeness, Jonathan never crossed any professional boundaries. Their relationship remained grounded in mutual respect and admiration, built on a foundation of trust rather than obligation. Yet, there were moments when Jonathan caught himself wondering what it might be like to share more than just work with Maria, to invite her into his world beyond the mansion walls. He quickly dismissed these thoughts, reminding himself that their bond was special precisely because it wasn't defined by traditional expectations. Months turned into a year, and the foundation flourished. Word spread quickly about its programs, attracting donors and volunteers from all walks of life. Families who once struggled to make ends meet found new opportunities thanks to scholarships and job training initiatives. Single parents like Maria discovered a network of support that lifted them up during their toughest times. And through it all, Jonathan and Maria remained at the heart of it, guiding the organization with unwavering dedication. Looking back, Jonathan marveled at how much had changed since that rainy night he followed Maria home. What began as a moment of curiosity had blossomed into a partnership that transformed countless lives, including his own. He no longer measured success by the size of his bank account or the grandeur of his possessions. Instead, he found fulfillment in the connections he forged and the impact he made on the world around him. And Maria? She continued to inspire everyone she met, proving that resilience and kindness could light even the darkest corners of life. Together, they proved that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion could lead to the greatest transformations. Years passed, and the bond between Jonathan and Maria grew stronger with each passing day. What had started as a quiet curiosity on Jonathan's part had evolved into a deep friendship, one that transcended their roles as employer and employee. They weren't just two people connected by circumstance anymore. They were allies in creating something meaningful, something that reached far beyond the walls of Jonathan's mansion or Maria's modest apartment. The foundation, a new chapter, became a beacon of hope for countless families struggling to navigate life's challenges. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, disagreements, and moments of doubt, but it worked because of the passion driving it. Maria poured her heart into the foundation, using her own experiences to guide its programs. She understood what single parents needed because she'd lived it herself. And Jonathan, once a man who measured success by numbers on a balance sheet, found purpose in seeing lives transformed through their efforts. One evening, as they sat together in Jonathan's study going over reports from the foundation, Maria looked up from the papers in her hands and smiled. "Do you remember the first time we talked about this?" she asked softly. "When you told me you wanted to help others like me?" Jonathan chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "How could I forget? You looked at me like I'd lost my mind." "Well, maybe not exactly like that," Maria teased, her eyes twinkling. "But I did wonder if you were serious. No offense, but rich people don't usually care about folks like us." Her words stung a little, but Jonathan knew she didn't mean them harshly. In fact, he appreciated her honesty. It reminded him how far he'd come since those early days of awkward conversations and uncertain intentions. "I get it," he said after a pause. "And honestly, I probably wouldn't have cared either before I met you." Maria tilted her head, studying him thoughtfully. "What changed?" Jonathan hesitated, searching for the right words. How could he explain something so profound without sounding overly sentimental? Finally, he settled on simplicity. "You showed me what real strength looks like," he said quietly. "Not the kind of strength that comes from having money or simhalaming money or power, but the kind that comes from facing hard things every single day and still finding a way to keep going. That's something I'll never forget." Maria's cheeks flushed slightly, and she looked down at the papers in her lap. "I didn't do anything special," she murmured. "Just what I had to." "That's exactly why it's special," Jonathan replied firmly. Most people would have given up, but you didn't. You kept fighting for your kids, for yourself, for everyone around you. That takes courage, real courage. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Maria cleared her throat and changed the subject, though the warmth in her expression lingered. Anyway, enough of that. Let's finish these reports so we can call it a night. They worked late into the evening, discussing plans for upcoming events, reviewing applications for scholarships, and brainstorming ideas for new initiatives. As always, Maria's insights were invaluable. She had an uncanny ability to see solutions where others saw obstacles, and her practical approach grounded Jonathan's sometimes lofty ideas. Together, they balanced each other perfectly, a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared goals. As the years went by, the impact of the foundation rippled outward, touching lives in ways neither Jonathan nor Maria could have anticipated. Single mothers who once struggled to put food on the table opened small businesses thanks to microloans provided by the foundation. Teenagers who dreamed of college but feared they couldn't afford it received scholarships that allowed them to pursue their education. Families burdened by medical debt found relief through emergency assistance programs. Each success story was a testament to the power of compassion and collaboration, but perhaps the most profound change occurred within Jonathan himself. He no longer viewed his wealth as a privilege to hoard or flaunt. Instead, he saw it as a tool, a means to create opportunities for others. His mansion, once a symbol of isolation, became a hub of activity, hosting fundraisers, workshops, and community gatherings. Neighbors who had barely known his name now greeted him warmly, grateful for the positive influence he brought to the area. Maria's life transformed too, though in quieter, more personal ways. With financial stability came peace of mind, allowing her to focus on her children's futures without constant worry. Her oldest son graduated high school at the top of his class and earned a scholarship to a prestigious university. Her daughter discovered a love for art, filling sketchbooks with vibrant drawings inspired by the world around her. Even her youngest, the boy who used to cling to her legs whenever strangers approached, blossomed into a confident young man eager to explore the world. Through it all, Maria remained humble, deflecting praise and insisting she was just doing her part. But those who knew her best saw the truth. She was extraordinary. Her resilience, kindness, and unwavering determination inspired everyone lucky enough to cross her path. One crisp autumn afternoon, several years after the foundation's launch, Jonathan stood on a stage at a local park, addressing a crowd gathered for the organization's annual gala. Families, volunteers, donors, and community leaders filled the space, their laughter and chatter mingling with the scent of freshly baked goods from nearby food stalls. Children ran around playing tag, while adults browsed tables showcasing handmade crafts and artwork created by participants in the foundation's programs. Maria stood off to the side, watching nervously as Jonathan adjusted the microphone. Despite her growing confidence over the years, public speaking still made her uncomfortable. But when Jonathan motioned for her to join him on stage, she reluctantly stepped forward, earning enthusiastic applause from the crowd. "Thank you all for being here today," Jonathan began, his voice steady and warm. "This event is a celebration, not just of what we've accomplished, but of the incredible people who make it possible. People like Maria." He turned to her, smiling. "Maria, you've been the heart and soul of this foundation from the very beginning. Without your guidance, your wisdom, and your relentless dedication, none of this would have been possible. So tonight I want to honor you, not just as a friend, but as a hero." Maria blinked rapidly, clearly overwhelmed. "I'm no hero," she protested, shaking her head. "I just try to do what's right. And that's exactly what makes you a hero, Jonathan countered gently. Doing what's right isn't always easy, but you do it anyway, every single day. The crowd erupted into cheers, and Maria finally gave in, smiling despite the tears streaming down her face. As Jonathan handed her a plaque engraved with the words, "Champion of Hope," she hugged him tightly, whispering a heartfelt thank you that only he could hear. Later that evening, as the festivities wound down and the park emptied out, Jonathan and Maria lingered behind, sitting on a bench beneath a canopy of golden leaves. The air was cool but pleasant, carrying the faint aroma of fallen foliage and distant bonfires. For a long time, neither of them spoke, content to simply sit in companionable silence. Finally, Maria broke the quiet. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked softly. "The night you followed me home?" Jonathan nodded, gazing out at the darkening sky. "All the time," he admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? Like we're completely different people now." "We are," Maria agreed. "But in some ways, we're still the same. You were curious then, and you're curious now. Me? I was just trying to survive. Still am, in a way." "You're thriving," Jonathan corrected her. "Look at everything you've done for your kids, for this community, for me. You've changed lives, Maria, including mine." She smiled, leaning back against the bench. "Funny how things work out, isn't it? If you hadn't followed me that night, none of this would have happened." Jonathan grinned. "Maybe fate had other plans for us." "Or maybe," Maria said, nudging him playfully, "you were just nosy." They both laughed, the sound echoing softly in the stillness of the evening. As they sat there under the stars, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, they knew one thing for certain. Life had a funny way of bringing people together when they least expected it. And sometimes, those unexpected connections led to the most beautiful journeys of all.